Great. So would anyone object if I started reading? All right. So I have our entire case and all the cards for it linked on a Google Doc. I'm hearing a little bit of echo or someone else's. Oh, there we go.
Hold on.
Okay, I'll hold on.
So I know that they put out everyone's probably ready, but they put up for start time 12:35, right? Not 12:30. And we could certainly go earlier. It's just that I was trying to grab some water and do it.
All fine. If you need some time, it's all good.
So maybe 2 more minutes. Thanks. Okay, just a couple things before we begin. And I'm not saying that you don't have to begin immediately after this, but just want, so I'd appreciate if both teams, when they start their prep time or when they stop, could say something either orally or hold up a phone so that both teams know how the prep time is being used, and judges also can see that. And there was something else. I'm just like, what's it? No, I guess that's well, anyway, that's all.
Also, really quickly before we start, I don't know why my Word document or like verbatim just stopped working. So Peyton's helping me fix it. It'll be like 1 minute.
Okay.
Does anyone know how to change the settings so that you only see people with videos on? I know that there's a way to do this. I just don't see it.
Look at someone who doesn't have the video on and like control click if you're on a Mac or like something similar if you're not, and it'll give you the option to hide in non-video.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I also just fixed it, so I'm good to start. Sorry about that.
Great. So I am personally a Google Docs man, so I'm going to send a Google Doc with what we're reading and all of our evidence. If you prefer it for me to send all of this on the email chain, I can also do that as well. But there we go. Is anyone not ready for me to read?
One last second. Okay, so just want to confirm, right? So it is Newton South Con speaking first, right? And then NSU second prompt. Great.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well done.
Good.
My time will begin now. We negate contention 1 is civil war, and subpoint A is resource extraction. Downey 10 writes that since World War II, colonial empires have relied on the IMF to ensure the continued access and control over raw materials. Today, this takes place through the IMF structural adjustment policies. Global Exchange 11 writes that unlike the path historically followed by industrialized countries, the IMF forces the global south to prioritize exports over the development of diversified economies. The Global Exchange writes that this happens in 3 ways. First, IMF SAPs force shifts from production for local consumption to the production of exports destined for wealthy countries. Second, the IMF requires countries to eliminate assistance to domestic industries while providing benefits for multinational corporations. Assets such as forest land and water are sold to foreign investors at rock bottom prices. And third, IMF SAPs ensure debt repayment by devaluing national currencies to make exports cheaper. This increases resource extraction. As in Sierra Leone, Yumin 20 writes, IMF currency devaluation lowered the cost of Sierra Leone's minerals for other countries, incentivizing diamond extraction and decreasing the amount of revenue the government could generate off selling diamonds. Empirically, Row 16 writes that 88% of low-income countries became more dependent on extractive exports over the past 16 years. Resource dependency is catastrophic because resource extraction gains are concentrated in the hands of a corrupt elite and commodity prices often fluctuate. Sachs explains that there's a negative correlation between a country's dependence on mineral exports and poverty, malnutrition, authoritarianism, and civil war. Bannon 03 corroborates that 1 billion people live in countries that have been unable to sustain policies and institutions that would have allowed them to develop because of dependency on commodities. Close to 50 armed conflicts had strong links to resource exploitation. Subpoint B is fostering unrest. Hartzell 10 writes that IMF-induced economic liberalization produces clear-cut winners and losers. For example, state employees saw their salaries cut 25%, and taxes targeted citizens while multinational corporations were granted privileges. Losers might be motivated to engage in armed conflict. Moreover, Toussaint 20 writes that the IMF has flexibility towards right-wing governments facing strong left opposition. Chile, Brazil, and Nicaragua prove cases in point. The IMF doesn't hesitate to fund dictatorships. Overall, for these two reasons, Goen 07 finds structural adjustment facility programs increase the country's risk of experiencing civil conflict by 102.8%. Not only do civil wars kill millions, but Thine 12 of Ukitaki writes that civil wars cause floods of refugees, placing a heavy burden on a state's ability to provide public services and spreading infectious diseases. And civil wars severely disrupt neighboring economies due to disrupted trade flows and decrease in FDI. Contention 2 is epistemic economics. As a definition, neoliberalism is the economic theory of letting the market control every possible sector of the economy without intervention. Before the peak of the IMF, the world was transitioning towards social democracies. Iber 18 explains that for most of the 20th century, neoliberals were losing. The world was going in a social democratic direction. European countries built up welfare states, and the global south demanded consideration of their economic needs. The IMF interrupted that transition. Mueller-Levin writes, the fund legitimized neoliberalism through its role as an authoritative scholar, research surveilling, advising states, and being a key player in transnational society. Even today, BWP 19 writes that the IMF continues to be among the most powerful norm setters of international development. Mueller continues, neoliberalism became firmly entrenched in the 1990s. The ideology was supported through the IMF and had greater leverage than other international organizations because of the resources that it had to outstrip its critics. This rise in neoliberalism destroyed sustainable development for the global poor. Kuttner 19 writes that neoliberal regimes promoted rules created by private capital to keep democratic governments from asserting rules of fair competition or countervailing social interests. Absent this neoliberal takeover, social democracies would have created a better world. Sandbrook 07 writes that social democracies provide an antidote to the destructive tendencies of neoliberalism through progressive taxation, labor market regulation, and welfare provision. Sandbrook concludes that income growth in developing countries was 2.5% under social democracies compared to 0% under neoliberalism. The development of the social capitalist 60s and 70s is superior in all metrics to the neoliberal 80s and 90s. Overall, Garcia 11 concludes, poverty in the global south was caused by the West. Trader 19 terminalizes that conventional development theories are morally unacceptable and have condemned billions of people to suffer extreme poverty for generations. Thus, we negate.
Is everyone ready?
Hayden, send a speech doc.
Oh yeah, I'll do that before. Okay, that should have just went through. Is everyone ready? We affirm contention 1 is Indo-Pak conflict. India and Pakistan tensions are decreasing for the first time in 20 years, as Slater in 21 finds that the two countries had agreed to a ceasefire. The reason comes from Chand, who finds that the IMF aids countries' economies, as they write that IMF has played an important role in the Indian economy. India has received timely help from the fund to eliminate the deficit on its balance of payments. The fund granted loans to meet the financial difficulty that is arising out of the Indo-Pak conflict. India got a large amount of financial assistance from the fund to solve its economic crises arising due to natural calamities like flood, earthquakes, famine, etc. This growth has been crucial to prevent an Indo-Pak war, as the Moon in 17 finds the opportunity cost of conflict rise when countries move to higher stages of economic development, as they have more to lose from conflict and have more resources to negotiate peaceful settlements with. When both countries were rapidly growing, peace talks between India and Pakistan happened and fatality levels decreased considerably. Indo-Pak war goes nuclear, as Kekin 17 finds that billions could die because the greatest possibility of nuclear war is on the Indo-Pak border. Pakistani leaders leave threshold ambiguous. There is no guarantee that India's restraint will continue. Miscalculation is South Asia's middle name. Tact changes might exacerbate this already combustible situation. Indo-Pak when war goes, it causes extinction, as Roggeway in 19 finds that nuclear weapons would append life on Earth, as even a small nuclear war between India and Pakistan could threaten the global food supply, which would harm everyone. Contention 2 is money laundering. Money laundering is on the decline, as Harold in 20 finds that the assessed value of money laundering threat has decreased by about half in the last 5 years. The decline of money laundering threat was attributed to implementing the anti-money laundering, or the AML, and the combating the financing of terrorism, or the CFT. This is due to the IMF, as the fund was crucial in promoting and supporting the AML and the CFT, as Lagarde in 17 finds that money laundering and terrorist financing can threaten economic stability, which is why the IMF has become increasingly active in promoting the AML and the CFT. The IMF responded to calls from the international community to expand its AML and extended them to include the combating of financing of terrorism. The IMF assessments of Italy, China, Canada, Mexico, and Colombia. In the past 15 years, the IMF has helped shape domestic and international AML and CFT policies, providing financial integrity advice and evaluating countries' compliance with the IML and the CFT standard. This is empirically verified in Latvia, where Ratters 19 finds that the IMF urged Latvia to maintain momentum in its fight against money laundering. Stung by international criticism, the government has launched an effort to clean up the financial sector, so the Latvian parliament boosted powers in combating the money laundering and terrorism financing. The impact is threefold. First is crime. Cracking down on money laundering eliminates financing for criminal organizations, as Thani 05 finds that combating the money from crime also means suppressing the ultimate purpose of criminal activities, making profit. It's a way to suppress the means for doing harm, which is why combating money laundering is an important means in the fight against organized crime. Organized crime is a global threat, as the UN finds that it has been globalized and turned into the world's foremost economic and armed powers, as transnational crime has become a threat to peace, development, and the sovereignty of nations, and to governance and stability. Crime creates instability, so we must go after the money. Second is terrorism. Decreasing money laundering decreases terrorism. As Fielden 14 finds that money is the lifeblood of terrorism. Attention must be given to the individuals who finance terrorism, which is why eliminating a single terrorist financer will have a greater impact on preventing attacks than merely a few bomb carriers. Financiers are the engine of the terrorist train, as terrorists have discovered numerous ways to fund their activities, which are modern-day money laundering. COVID has allowed a roadmap for future bioterror, as Means in 20 finds that there is little doubt that these lessons are being studied carefully across the globe, and bioterror causes extinction, as Cooper in 13 finds that individuals releasing highly deadly genetic malware into the wild, extinction would be inevitable. Third, human trafficking. AML programs are saving millions of victims, as Manson in 14 finds that there are currently 40.3 million global victims of human trafficking. Effective AML programs can help identify trackers and alert the authorities as perpetrators of human trafficking transform their financial proceeds through money laundering, and UN in 20 finds that ending human trafficking is a moral imperative necessary to end poverty and marginalization. Thus, we affirm.
Great, let's do cross.
Perfect.
All right, that's the first question.
Yeah.
Can you explain the warrant for the last piece of evidence you read?
The human trafficking?
Yeah.
So the warrant is because they are the most vulnerable in population. So in order for human traffickers to get the standing that they need, they go after the most vulnerable in populations, which is why they're currently marginalized. On your first subpoint about resource extraction, you give me evidence that says 50 arms conflicts were caused because of resource extraction. How many of those are attributed to the IMF?
I'd say 50.
So there's no other alternatives
so
of resource extraction.
I'd say the IMF is the only country that's pursuing bad development strategies for these countries and forcing them into resource extraction.
Wait, the IMF is the only country?
It's the only organization. So obviously, like, maybe some countries had resources before, but our argument is the IMF keeps these countries addicted to resources because they're taking out IMF
what's
loans
one
to
example
keep them in
of
bad
a
development strategies.
What's one example of a civil war that has been started as a result? You mentioned Brazil.
I'd say Brazil, more importantly, probably Liberia.
Okay, because Brazil did not have a civil war in the last century.
I didn't mention Brazil. brought up Brazil.
Or that's on your subpoint B.
That's about authoritarianism. Obviously, authoritarian governments are bad. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So why is the IMF key towards money laundering? Isn't it one of like the 4 organizations that created the framework that you're talking about?
Yeah, so specifically Lagarde says that the reason why the IMF is necessary is because they're the organization that evaluates compliance and gives advice.
Why
so they're
can't anyone else evaluate compliance or give
because
advice?
that's the IMF's jurisdiction to
If the
evaluate
IMF
compliance
didn't
with
exist,
policies.
if the IMF didn't exist, but like the 3 other, like the World Trade Organization, the International Commission
Okay,
on Trade still existed, wouldn't they just follow what
So
the IMF
the
is
issue with
now
that
doing?
assumption, is the Herald evidence from 2020, which talks about how money laundering has decreased by half in the last 5 years because of the AML and the
No,
CFT.
I
And what we
understand.
what we tell you is that since the IMF promoted that standard, is when this decrease happened.
Hayden, I understand your argument. I'm just confused. If the IMF had not existed, why
We're saying
the
that money
multiple
laundering would
other
still be
international
high, 'cause look
organizations
at what
that had
happened.
done, why the multiple other organizations couldn't have just filled in the
That's what I'm
same
trying to get at.
surveillance role?
The Herald evidence talks about how the IMS or how the AML and the CFT, since their implementation in the last 5 years, was crucial, and we tell you that the IMS specifically was necessary.
You're not
On your
responding to my
second,
question. Why
I
is the
keep
IMF
repeating my
crucial to-
answer. We're
but
not
why is
going
the IMF
anywhere.
crucial to the
Can I ask a
AFT or
question on
C-
your
IMF or
C2?
CFT?
On
I mean, like-
neoliberalism, your example is that European states are no longer welfare states. Don't they all have like welfare and
It's not
single
European
ta-
states. Our
That's
argument is
what you
that in the
mentioned.
global south and the developing world, they're no longer
You
welfare
mentioned in
states.
the
Our argument-
1930s there was a shift from
No.
away from neoliberalism and European states and which were welfare states.
No, our argument was that you were shifting to social democracies both because European countries are building welfare states and because the South was demanding consideration of their economic needs instead of wanting to get taken
So if
over
we
by the
solve,
West's economic
so if
needs.
we solve for like progressive taxes and all these things you talk about, does that non-unique
No,
or does
because
that take you out of your C2?
Progressive taxes aren't solving the problem. The problem is that as long as neoliberalism is existing as the main philosophy for these countries, they're always open to rampant like abuse from multinational organizations who will steal the growth
So let's
that the
go to
poor
your
need to survive.
your
Or
response
rather
to
for
my
us.
Okay.
All right, rebuttal document is in the chat. I don't think it should be too fast, but it's good to have anyway, in case something cuts out. Ready? Anyone not ready? Okay. Overview. They're being super problematic. They read an argument that is a sensitive topic about human trafficking without offering a trigger warning, which sets norms that actively make the debate space less safe. Drop them to set the norm that when reading such arguments, they should trigger warning prior to reading them. This is compounded by the fact that like 100 spectators are getting live streamed, and this is TOC quarters. It's dropping them sets norms. Go to their first contention about Pakistan. 4 responses. 1, turn it. The IMF caused Pakistani instability. Abdul 19 writes Pakistan frequently approached the IMF for loans. Every time the loans were accompanied by structural adjustment, these programs did not achieve their objectives. Pakistan's interim payments average 70% of government revenue in the IMF from the military governments within Pakistan. Second, turn of the IMF enabled Pakistani nuclearization. Ahmed 19 writes, after 1990, Pakistan's nuclear proliferation capability was enhanced. U.S. imposed sanctions. However, Pakistan did not believe their economy would be affected because sanctions did not extend to loans provided by the IMF. Pakistan began to assemble nuclear weapons. Preferred this turn to their case because Singh 18 mounted war between Pakistan and India is inevitable given the mistrust and misguided actions at the border. The actual probability and elements of who will not win war is 0. Even if there's a short-term decrease in tensions, does not matter in the long term. Third, turn it. Shukrameen 19 explains that given its sponsoring numerous terrorist groups, Pakistan can use the $6 billion in IMF loans to finance and strengthen terrorist infrastructure. Shukrameen further said Pakistan's expenditures are highly opaque. Azad 16 includes it. Terrorist groups sow distrust between India and Pakistan, provoking conflicts that escalate into nuclear war. This outweighs with higher tensions in the subcontinent, destabilizes the region, fueling more terror. And fourth, our case is about how the IMF increases conflict. If we link in, we look at the impact. The only difference is we outweigh in scope because we affect the entire world, not just Pakistan. Go to their second argument of the ASL and money laundering. 6 responses. First, The Economist from this week writes that war against money laundering is being lost as laundering is increasing and the total cost expected to be 100 times more than the estimated amount. Second, indict their evidence is it's reverse causal. It's that the AML forced the IMF to start laundering operations because they are dependent on IMF programs. Third, non-unique. U.S. Financial Crimes Enforcement Network solves as Chen 21 writes that this agency prevents and punishes money laundering operations globally, just like the IMF. And fourth, their arguments about promotion of the ASL, but A, the IMF is not key. Other international institutions can do this, and B, there isn't a reason why the promotion has done anything. Don't let them read a new one. Fifth, the Lincoln Vogel 19 writes the IMF anti-money laundering programs have failed because all they do is ask countries to reform with no actual enforcement mechanism of independent law enforcement. And 6, Turner Thompson 20 writes that over half of all countries who think IMF loans are the most corrupt countries, with these corrupt leaders embezzling IMF assistance to boost financial crime through money laundering. At worst, this is terminal defense because the IMF is perpetually creating a problem it's trying to fix. On crime, turn it on evasion. As ROM01 writes, like the prohibition, what is happening now is a class of case of police creating an increased demand for their own services by inventing new crimes, which in turn creates a criminal industry to evade the new laws. That's why empirical evidence indicates that anti-money laundering simulates kidnapping, smuggling, and racketeering. On terrorism, there isn't a warrant as to why terrorists have access to bioweapons. They said the terrorists have learned the lessons. What lessons? 2, the terrorists don't have can't get bioterror weapons, as Morris 14 meant that terrorists A, don't have the technological or scientific capacity to engineer a bioweapon, and B, even if a weapon was launched, medical countermeasures would drastically lower the impact of an attack, so it doesn't lead to extinction. On human trafficking, it's not working, as Sadowski 20 meant that human trafficking is increasing. Second, there's alternative solvency, as 419 meant that governments use the data tool MEMAX created by JARBA to fight trafficking, and SA15 concludes that this data tool uses data from the deep web. Third, turn it false positives. Francis 18 finds that money laundering, anti-money laundering policy interventions is successful less than 0.1% of the time, and frequently generates millions of false positives on ordinary citizens, which in turn just increases terrorist radicalization and crime. Fruit 18 includes 95% of false positives. Fourth, they say human trafficking is a prereq to poverty reduction. The warrant they gives reverse causal. Yes, people who are poor are getting trafficked. This doesn't mean that trafficking causes poverty, but rather poverty decreases. There's less trafficking, which means our neoliberalism argument is the best thing to their case, because we say neoliberalism is the cause of the global poor in the global south. And we look into their argument about our argument about civil conflicts, because if people get into poverty, because getting pushed into civil conflicts and are in war zones where they're very desperate, they will get trafficked. It's much easier for them to be trafficked. So we link in on both of our arguments. Vote con.
Really quick, I didn't look at the doc. I'm gonna need some. Oh yeah, I'm gonna need some evidence because it's all paraphrased. Okay.
Go for it. Yeah.
Can
All
I
of it.
see The Economist that money laundering is on the incline?
Yeah.
Vogel 19.
Yeah. All right. Sent Vogel. Did you see the other one?
Yeah, I'm about to.
Okay.
And then I also need Sadulski, and that's it.
Sadulski, yeah. Dia gets in that too. Okay.
Just let me know when you send all that.
Everything is sent but the last piece.
Okay.
I got it. You do it?
No, I got it. I got it. All set.
Everything's sent.
Okay, I'll let you know when I get it, and then we will start our prep time. Let me look. Okay, yeah, I think I just got all of them. So let me get my timer out, and P and I will start running our prep time starting. Okay, that was 210 I got it as. I don't know if everyone got the same. Okay. Actually, wait, we're gonna take a few more. Sorry, wait, I just stopped prep time again. Could I call for, I don't know if you sent it, the turn on human trafficking about false positives never being successful?
Yeah, if you could send that. Okay, it's sent. It's about to be sent. Oh, it's about to be sent. My bad. How much are you guys at, by the way?
That was, I think, 5 or 6 more seconds.
to
So
2:15.
2:15. Yeah. Okay,
It's
that's
done.
fine. Yeah, I didn't need to prep for that. Okay, so we're at 2:15. Is anyone not ready? It's gonna start frontlining, going down my case, and then going to their case. Okay. Starting how we should have read a trigger warning. One, the fact that something can be explicit or graphic is really subjective. We'd argue we just said the word human trafficking, which is definitely not a reason to vote us down. But 2 responses as to why trigger warnings are really bad. First, Paulus finds it discussing uncomfortable materials a form of therapy. Either trigger warnings are ineffective or they commodify trauma in one's brain. But secondly, Harper finds that trigger warnings cause anxiety and emotional responses to higher rates than no trigger warning because you're hearing these things, which means they're not gaining any offense there. Let's go to my argument on Indo-Pak conflict. They give 3 turns as to how Pakistan is really worse off because of the IMF, but these are all just non-uniques to our contention because it means that even though Pakistan was worse off, it didn't cause a nuclear war, which means they're not getting any impact off these turns. Then go to our C2 on money laundering. First, they give the Economist answers that says that money laundering is on the incline, but our Herald evidence is much better on this question because it's actually quantified. Their evidence is really bad. Then they say it's reverse causal. No, it's not. We can look at the case. It's not at all. Then they say that the IMF is not key, but the Lagarde evidence indicates that although there are other programs, the IMF evaluates compliance with those programs, which means it is key. That also responds to their next response about there's no reason why promotion is necessary. Then they give you the Vogel responses that programs fail because there's no enforcement, but this supercharges our argument because the IMF serves as that enforcement to make sure countries are abiding by these policies. Then they tell you autocratic regimes are really bad, but there's no terminal impact they're getting here. And yeah, it's not getting better. Then on terrorism, this is the impact we're going for. They say that no one has bioterror as per their Morris 14 evidence, but our means 20 evidence postdates and says that COVID laid the roadmap for future bioterror because there's increased studies on how to mutate bacteria rapidly. Really quickly on human trafficking, they give a turn about false positive, but this is not a turn. One, the evidence says that it's going to get better with the issue is going to get better. But secondly, it doesn't say that false positive even do anything bad for crime. Let's go to their case. on their C1 on civil war, first on resource extraction. First, there's no link there. Downey evidence says that the countries and corporates rely on technology, agriculture research, insurance, and the WTO and the World Bank, not just the IMF, to extract raw materials, which means it will happen in either world. Secondly, it's non-unique. Their global exchange evidence also can see that the WTO is doing the same thing. Third, you can turn it. The OECD finds that natural resource extraction leads to economic growth and diversification because the OECD found that in 2011, the natural resources extraction had been key for economic growth across Africa through exports of agriculture and minerals such as hydrocarbon. That's also why Gelb finds that in Malaysia, they use capital generated from their natural resource exploitation to diversify their economy and invest in energy, communications, and transportation. But fourth, you can turn it again. Lundgren finds that the IMF improves government outcomes by preventing autocratic control of resources. The alternative is autocratic regimes being worse for resource exploitation, which means the alternative to not having the IMF is really bad governments actually doing worse with these resources. Go to their subpoint B on fostering unrest. First, you can turn it. Nelson finds that a study of 120 countries over close to 40 years suggests that there has been a positive relationship between the IMF and democracy. Contradictory evidence that they might read you are based on less reliable data. You should prefer this piece of evidence because it's more holistic than any of their evidence because they just point out a few civil wars, but ours is holistically on democracy. But secondly, there's no link to civil war, unstable domestic institution, disease spread, and ethnic conflict are all larger internal links to civil war than resource extraction is. But fourth, you can turn it because Lay finds that if we win our terrorism scenario, we also link into civil war because about 12% of terrorists escalates to the force of civil war, which means if we win our terrorism scenario, we also win a link into civil war. Go to their C2 epistemic economies. The IMF is moving away from neoliberalism in favor of green investment to climate change. This serves as terminal non-unique to their case because neoliberal policies are decreasing. It also serves as a term because green technology can solve emissions and climate change, which outweighs because it affects the entire world, not just IMF countries. But even if you buy the link that the IMF is still neoliberal, there are two reasons why neoliberalism is actually great. First is the environment. France finds that capitalism is the only way to incentivize innovation necessary to solve for the environment because only with free market capitalism can the environment hope to be clean, since companies and businesses are finding profitable to keep the environment and their customers, and new industries are finding innovative ways to help fight pollution, which is why Fredericksy finds that capitalism is the most effective way to combat climate change. Second is democracy. Neoliberalism solves war through shifting military competition to economic, which also solves for their civil war scenario on their C1 because capitalism decreases the chance of a war.
I'll take like 10 seconds. 4 seconds taken. Okay, give across.
Yeah.
Okay, stepping back from the round for a second, as a person, do you actually think that trigger warnings are bad?
Yes, which is why we do. Well, okay. So I think there's a difference here between trigger warnings for explicit content that we read and graphic describing. We say the words human trafficking and most vulnerable victims. I don't know then how you in a round can say that something is or is not objectively like triggering, right?
Why don't you err on the side of safety though?
What'd you say?
Why don't you err on the side of safety though?
Because why don't you err on the side of safety? You read impacts about war. Some people could be triggered by that. Like,
yeah,
I don't.
We know. Okay, we know that's not the same thing. This argument's like a really
the same thing because according to your logic, why don't you err on the side of safety that someone could think that war is triggering? Like, I don't think there's a subjective.
I think we are all desensitized to war right now, given mass media. I don't think we're desensitized to more like graphic issues like human trafficking. Also, I just think it's kind of bad that as a person, you are reading an argument that I'm sure you agree outside of this round is so clearly false.
I actually don't agree that's clearly false. As per our evidence, it says that trigger warnings are bad. Also, if you really felt that way, we texted you right before the round. You asked what we were reading. We told you if you wanted us to read a trigger warning, you could have.
I assumed you would because that's a good norm. You can have a question though.
Yeah, we say on our wiki how we feel about trigger warnings. So you could have looked at that. Yeah, I'm going to get a question. On resource extraction, your Downey evidence says that a bunch of other actors do it. So in a world without the IMF, how much does resource extraction actually decrease?
We're not going for resource extraction, but we still think a lot.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna ask to take a question. Yeah. So how does like getting 2 more studies on how to mutate bacteria enable terrorists who have no scientific expertise or any money to now be able to become
scientific expertise coming when they increase studies in bio?
Right, but I can read a study about how to make a bioterror bomb, and I still cannot make said bomb.
Okay, but you're also not studying every day how to use bioterror, right? Like you're not a terrorist.
My dad is a biologist, and I asked him if he could make a bioweapon, and he still cannot make a bioweapon, which is disappointing because he's
he
been being
terrorist?
abolished.
Like, is like my point is,
I don't think so.
the only defense we get on terrorism is that the Morris 14 evidence says they do not have bioterror, but Means 20 definitely postdates, and is the uniqueness on our claim, which says that because of COVID-19, there's
Okay.
been increased studies.
Got you. You can have a question.
Okay, on, I actually don't have one. You can get one.
Sure. You're the only in-time term to neoliberalism is capitalism is good because it solves climate change, correct?
No, the second one was democracy. When we're focused on the economy, countries are less focused on militarized.
But is the warrant for democracy capitalism?
Yeah.
Okay, so these are just capitalist arguments. That's cool.
I
That's
mean,
cross.
yeah, it's neoliberalism.
Yeah,
Capitalism is
we don't say capitalism is bad though. That's cross. That was 46 seconds, which puts us at a grand total of 50 seconds. Not 50.
All right, so it's going to start in our case, go to their case, weighing in between. All right. All right. Starting on our first contention. On our first contention, basically the World Trade Organization is always going to increase the amount of resource extraction and there are other reasons why it exists. So there's always the same incentive for civil war, taking them out all the turns. Also, they've conceded the biggest link into civil war is inequality, insofar as they conceded that the biggest cause of inequality in the global South is neoliberalism forcing bad reforms on countries that only focus on corporations. Obviously, we have the best link into this argument, which is why we're the only one with a terminalized link into it. With that said, let's go to epistemics. They get to it with like 10 seconds left and critically undercover it. Let's go for our argument. Iber writes that before the rise of the IMF, the world was going towards social democracies, but Mueller evidence finds that the IMF's role as a norm setter, scholarship author, and global advisor allowed them to infect the world with neoliberal capitalism. That was damning for the global South, as their Sandbrook evidence explains that social democracies focus on redistributive outcomes over the whims of multinational corporations, which is why social democracies empirically outperform neoliberalism in every economic metric, and the austere IMF created neoliberalism that has kept billions of people in poverty. They give you two types of responses. One, they say the IMF is shifting away. One, this is retrospective. We tell you for 40 years they've promoted this ideology. But secondly, there's no reason why the IMF is shifting away from neoliberalism in the way they write their papers or the way they do surveillance, even if they're doing it in their rhetoric. On their other terms, it's all about capitalism. Our argument is so obviously not about capitalism. That's like saying Norway isn't a capitalist country or countries in Europe aren't capitalist. We're just saying social democracies are both capitalism and the use of funds to help your citizens improve their lives by regulating markets and giving money and services to the people, which we tell you is critical for not having billions of people in poverty per our trainer evidence, which we tell you one outweighs on scope insofar as it's the only global argument in the round, but secondly, definitely outweighs on the historical comparative because billions of people would have better metrics of growth that finally outweighs on probability insofar as it's, as we tell you, it's a retrospective argument that would have happened in the past. Let's go to their case. At the top, they just critically undercover the Indo-Pakistani terms. They just say that they're going to non-unique all of them. They've conceded conceded a link into extinction. Our Singh evidence finds conflict is inevitable in the Pakistani between Pakistan and India. But our Ahmed evidence finds that you wouldn't have Pakistan having nuclear weapons in the first place if you wouldn't have had the IMF letting them evade pressure from sanctions that would have stopped them from getting nuclear weapons in the first place, which we tell you is by far the best link into extinction in this round, insofar as it is one, conceded, and two, is actually linking into a better nuclear scenario than their bioterrorism argument. But then secondly, they've also conceded the Charmaine evidence that tells you that $6 billion the IMF gave them went towards funding terrorism, which we tell you is the best contextualized link towards stopping terrorism in the round insofar it is billions of dollars, so you know directly where it goes. On their argument of money laundering, they say that there's their Herald evidence is better than our 100 times evidence. Our 100 times evidence is one, literally a quantification right there, And secondly, it takes their evidence into account and finds that that their organizations are misrepresenting the actual amount of money laundering. It's going up in the status quo they're not solving, which is why, secondly, they go for terrorism to bioterrorism. There's no reason why knowing how to make a disease means you can transmit it, which is why Morse evidence finds they're never able to actually bring this into a weapon, even if they can make the disease, because whenever they create it, one, health system solves, and two, it can't transmit in the air.
Okay, we'll run prep time. I think we said we had 45 seconds left. Okay, so we'll start running it.
Okay, is everyone ready? It's going to start at weighing my case, their case. Is everyone good? You're preferring extinction for two reasons. The first is magnitude, because Deefeld in 17 explains that even small risks of extinction still away, because when we do probability times magnitude, because the expected continuation of humankind will lead to 500 trillion more people, so a tiny probability of extinction equates to tens of billions of people. And second, bias, because Dahlstrom in 11 explains that low probability, high magnitude impacts are often ignored because humans are psychologically biased against scenarios that they're outside their experience and thus difficult to comprehend, which justifies overcompensating, taking preventive actions since our gut response will be ill-calibrated. Starting at our first contention on Indo-Pak, they try to extend two turns. The first is that conflict is inevitable, but we would say that first, that means that extinction should have happened already. Second, they give no time frame to when this has happened. You can't weigh it. Then they say $6 billion, but they give no warrant to why this is true. On our contention two, this is where you can vote for us, because on money laundering, as Harold in 20 finds that money laundering has decreased by half in the last 5 years because the AML and the CFT programs, and Lagarde in 17 finds that the IMF expands and promotes the AML and the CFT because they evaluate compliance with policies and give financial integrity advice to countries, which is Routers in 19 finds that after the IMF pushed for this in Latvia, they adopted efforts that decreased money laundering. We're going for second impact on terrorism. Is what we tell you is Field in 14 that money laundering fuels terrorism is the root way to end it. It means in 20 finds that COVID has laid the blueprint for future bioterror, and there are increasing studies going into it. And Cooper in 13 finds that bioterror causes extinction because deadly genetic malware is mutating in the wild. They give two responses. The first is that 100% worse right now. However, that's about private organizations. We tell you that on net in countries, there's been a decrease in the last 5 years. There also is no quantifiable of what this money actually looks like. Then they extend the Morris thing on the impact, saying that this isn't really problematic, but means tells you that after COVID, you were able to see how bacteria mutated, which is why there's increasing studies into it. On their case, you can vote for us here because of the two conceded turns. They just say it's not about capitalism. We'd argue that this is about free market policies, which is also neoliberalism. The two reasons why you prefer our impacts over there is first, on the environment, is capitalism is the only way to incentivize the innovation necessary to solve the environment, as of Franz in 17. And that's why Friedrichs in 15 finds that capitalism is the most effective way to solve environmental issues. Without it, the damage becomes irreversible. The reason why you prefer this impact over any of theirs is because it's not just isolated to one area where the IMF is, but climate change affects the whole globe. At that point, we're outweighing on magnitude. But second, on democracy, also a conceded turn from Garcia in 15 finds that neoliberalism solves war through shifting from military competition to economic competition. That's why O'Neill in 03, a conceded piece of offense, finds that over 100 years of data shows that globalization actually makes war 32% less likely. Their arguments about neoliberalism simply are not true. But even if you don't want to buy that, look to the top response we make about the no link, which says that neoliberalism is actually stopping right now and they're shifting to climate change. They just say this is like rhetoric and retrospective. However, they concede the actions which have been taken to decrease climate change, because we tell you that green technology is happening right now. That's also another link into climate change, and we're telling you that the IMS is specifically necessary to help emissions. At that point where there's three conceded ways, you can vote for us on their case if you don't want to buy their extinction weighing. They say look to probability. We haven't seen a terrorist attack. Clearly the IMF is working.
Great, let's do cross. Ready?
Yeah.
Do you know who the biggest producer and innovator of wind power is in the status quo?
Doesn't
I don't
matter.
really get what this has to do with anything you're
Do
saying.
you know? It's
Like,
Denmark.
no, but
do
if
you know what?
this
Do you know what
was-
model of economic growth Denmark follows?
I would
Their social
Doesn't
democracy.
matter
How'd
because-
that happen?
Okay.
I would say like I think this is one, a really late response,
It's
and
not a
two,
really
I don't
late
really think
response.
that this has any concession when our argument is way more nuanced than that.
Your
Our
argument isn't
is
more
about how-
nuanced. Your argument is just saying that like you're saying
Okay,
our
can
argument is
I
capitalism and then
respond?
saying capitalism is bad. Like
No,
why
it's
is
saying in
neoliberalism capitalism?
2021, the argue. I don't remember the author, but in 2021, the IMF started to prioritize green technology, which is why they're increasingly putting investment toward that. It was actually Hawkins in October of this year.
No, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. That's not responsive to our argument. Do you have anything that tells me
No,
social
okay.
democracy is bad?
This is an independent turn for us. It doesn't have to be responsive to your argument. Neoliberalism is the idea of free market policies, as is capitalism. You responding to our turn saying capitalism is not the same. You haven't given us a reason as to why free market policies
Don't
aren't
you
the
think
same,
there's a difference?
or as to why our warrant isn't true that free market policies incentivize innovation by private companies, which solves our climate.
So don't you think there's a difference between having companies existing and competing or having companies existing with no regulations so that they can steal the resources
This
of the
analysis
global poor
was not
and
made.
pay
That's
no
your own
wages to the
analysis
companies?
of what neoliberalism looks
That's
like. We argue
exactly
that's
what
not
it's what it is,
neoliberalism
and it's
looks like.
conceded.
You've
No, this
conceded that there
analysis
is
is
some
not
zero
true.
income growth in neoliberalism, not because it's capitalism.
Okay.
Obviously, capitalism
You've
can
just been
foster
like going
growth.
in circles here.
You
Can I
just
ask a
conceded
question?
that
I ask a
neoliberal
question?
capitalism is obviously the bad thing, not the capitalism in the first place. Yeah, you can have a question.
So on our case, you tell us Morris. What is the date on Morris, just out of curiosity?
I have to pull it up. It's like
Just like, is it in the last year and a month? That's all I want to know.
I can pull it up after if you want. Let's
It's
see.
fine. I think you said it was from 2014, Hayden. So
I mean, it doesn't
Okay,
really matter. It
perfect.
doesn't really matter where it's from because with the
Or I
Morris
think it
evidence-
does matter
so-
when you concede
can I-
our
can I-
means
no, can I
evidence, which
finish?
says,
Like you asked me a question. So
okay,
it doesn't really matter when it's from, insofar as Morris tells you not only is there an increase in this amount of of this trafficking of money, but more importantly, that all metrics run by the government are bad metrics because they're not actually evaluating the truth in the increases in this laundering. Obviously, these the IMF does the reporting for the international,
No, it's not
for
that
the metrics that you talk about. Obviously, it wants to say that all the money laundering is
the
going
issue,
down.
wait,
it's not that they do the reporting. So our Herald evidence, the uniqueness does not say that the IMF said that money laundering is going down. It says money laundering has decreased by half in the last 5 years, specifically because of the AML and CFT programs. And the Lagarde evidence is the only reason why the AML and CFT programs are effective is because of IMF policy.
Also, our economist evidence, I did just look it up. It's from 2021, so it's definitely
it
more
the
recent than our
Economist?
evidence.
It wasn't the Economist we asked.
It was the 100 times evidence. The thing I can.
oh, I was
send is-
asking about
yeah.
your Morris evidence, but that's time.
Okay. So there's C1, there's C2. Okay. Everyone good?
1 second.
Okay. Let me know when you're ready.
You said there's C1 and then
Yeah,
what?
starting on Indo-Pac, then money laundering, then epistemic economics / neoliberalism.
Got it. Thank you.
You can, oh, my bad, my timer didn't start. You cannot win a quarterfinal round of the TOC while conceding a turn into nuke war. They have conceded the same evidence that after Pakistan got nuclear weapons, that made the conflict between India and Pakistan inevitable because they viewed themselves as existential threats. But Ahmed indicates that would the IMF had not given loans to Pakistan, they wouldn't be able to circumvent US sanctions. It would not have proliferated because of the economic harm. They say this should have happened. It's going to happen in the future. They say there's no time frame. Okay, there's no time frame in their case. This is conceded argument nuclear war that isn't responded to until the second summary. The round is over. Go to money laundering. One extent the turn that the IMF gives loans to countries who just fund them back to terrorists, which is why in Pakistan they gave $6 billion to terrorists. They say it's not quantified. That's the most quantified contextualization into what the IMF is doing in terms of funding. This argument is also conceded, and the round is over. Moreover, they concede the IMF is asset and doesn't even do anything in terms of money laundering. It's just suggesting, which is why our evidence in 2021 indicates that money laundering is on the rise. Lastly, they do not explain to you why terrorists cause extinction via bioweapons. They say deadly genetic malware is mutating. That is no way, shape, or form a warrant. We say that independent health experts can stop bioterrorist events from extinction. Go to our case. They make two responses that are wholly non-responsive. The first thing they say is the IMF is moving away from neoliberalism. One, why is green tech investment moving away from austere policies? Two, this is retrospective. We say in the last 50 years, they promoted neoliberalism, which has led to 2 billion people in poverty. The next thing they say is that capitalism is good. This is a misconstruction of our argument. We are saying that capitalism is good, but social democracies have the same aspect of free marketism, except they allow countries for innovation. They just don't allow for companies to take advantage of no regulations. At which point, extend the Ibert evidence that social democracies, the developing world was going in the direction of social democracies. But the Mueller evidence indicates the IMF legitimized neoliberalism through research, surveillance, advice, and as a key player in transnational society. As such, the BWP evidence indicates that even today, the IMF is the biggest actor in neoliberal development, which is key because the Kuttner evidence indicates that neoliberalism deregulates the government and destroys social interests, which is why the Sandberg evidence indicates that billions have been pushed into poverty because of neoliberalism. Extend the weighing on scope that we access to billions of people, they themselves say poverty leads to terrorism. So we link into their case to a much larger extent. Very simple round.
Okay, it's gonna be starting in the conceded weighing, my case, their case. Okay. Is anyone not ready? Start on the way, and it's entirely conceded. We tell you DPhil 17 explains that even small risks of extinction so outweigh when we do probability times magnitude, because the expected continuation of mankind will lead to 500 trillion more people. So tiny probability extinction equates to tens of billions of people. This means you are not evaluating anything on their second contention because they make no link into extinction, and the weighing is conceded, which means they are not getting any offense there. Let's go there anyways. The Franz evidence indicates that capitalism is the only way to incentivize innovation necessary to solve the environment, specifically a free market economy, as they write that the free market capitalism can save the environment, as companies and businesses are finding it profitable to keep the environment and their customers living clean. And Elon Musk is a perfect example of this. New industries are finding innovative ways to help fight pollution and restore clean water to the planet. The only reason any company is able to do this is because of a free market economy. We'd argue capitalism is also a neoliberal structure, which means that their link is that the IMF increases neoliberalism. They're also increasing the free market economy, which means we're getting such clean access into this link, considering it's conceded. They also concede the weighing on this term, which we tell you now is on magnitude, because their impact doesn't even link to extinction, only affects countries that are a part of the IMF, but our climate change term affects every single country all around the world and displaces millions of people, which means it's the easiest place to vote. Even if you don't want to go there, let's go to our case on our C2 on our, let's go to their turns really quickly. They say conflict is inevitable and extinction will happen in the future because the IMF gave Pakistan loans. But if this were true, extinction would have already happened. They give you no time frame. They say we don't give time frame either, but we do, because the means 20 evidence says that COVID laid the roadmap for bioterror and caused an increase in studies in how to mutate bacteria rapidly. They say that's not a warrant. I'm not really sure how people do bioterror, but I know the terrorists will probably figure it out. Let's go to our C2 on money laundering. This is where we're accessing it. The Herald evidence says that money laundering has decreased by half in the last 5 years because the AML and CFT, and Lagarde finds that the IMF is the one that promotes the AML and CFT and evaluates compliance, and that's why Reuters finds that after an IMF push, Latvia adopted efforts on our impact on terrorism. Field finds that money laundering fuels terror and is the root way to end it. Means finds that COVID laid the roadmap for future bioterror, and Cooper finds that bioterror leads to extinction because deadly genetic malware into the wild. That's the cleanest link into extinction. This is such an easy ballot for the app.
Good round, you all.
Good round. Good round.
Af, I need to see your, I realize this is like the impact to your C1, but I need to see everything about the Indo-Pak conflict leading to extinction.
From us?
Yeah.
Okay. Hayden, can you send that?
Isn't it already sent in the case on the email chain?
I can send it again because that's probably easier. There's a lot in there.
Sorry, yeah, I was just digging through.
Okay, that was just sent.
Okay, cool. As soon as I get that, I'm going to take some time to read some evidence and look over my flow, let the other judges do the same. And then once we've all put our decision into tab, I'll go ahead, disclose, give my RFDs. The other judges can do the same. Great debate, guys. Thank you for being here. Congratulations on making it to quarters at the TOC. No matter what happens, you should all be really proud.
So I want to make sure I just have one thing right. NSU, in rebuttal, when you were referring to the 3 turns from Newton South, and you provided an argument there about worse off, no nuclear war. Can you just make sure? Can you just can you just say the argument one more time? Thanks.
Yeah.
Just exactly whatever it was you said. If you have a speech doc, I'll take that.
Yeah, which turns were you referring to on?
You gave a response to the 3 turns on your Indo-Pac contention 1.
Oh yes, I will type that up and send it now. Just whatever I said, because it was kind of off the top of my head. So I'll send you that now.
They just said that
I can
that,
tell you if you want. I got it. So
And you can say it if you want. I mean, like,
so in rebuttal, I said that all of their turns says that Pakistan is nuclearizing. Pakistan got loans from the IMF, which were really bad. But these are all just non-unique to our case, because it means even if Pakistan was nuclearizing, nuclear war still didn't happen. And they said, and that time frame thing, that stuff.
all right, thanks. Okay, I'm sorry. I've got to go back to that last point. So in your rebuttal, you said even if you said you made the point about it not happening, right? Even if it wasn't working.
So that so their turns were that Pakistan's nuclearizing, which
I have that float in the summary, but I just I did I may have missed it, but I just was wondering whether that argument was made.
yeah. So they didn't extrapolate
If there's a difference of opinion on this, you guys can speak up as to, because again,
I was just going to say, I grouped them really quickly. I grouped them all together and said,
I know you grouped them together.
In non-unique our case, because even if Pakistan was nuclearizing, it didn't lead to nuclear war, which Payton extrapolated on and said there's no time frame because it didn't lead to nuclear war.
So we just said that it was in the future, but also I think that if you didn't hear it, you didn't hear it, you know?
Yeah.
There's no third final purpose.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. I just submitted my ballot. It looks like I was the last to do so. So I'll go ahead and give our decision. I'll give my RFD and comments and let the other judges do so as well. Great round, guys. Again, congrats for making it this far and for being here. I'm going to start out by saying I think there was way too much time wasted discussing the trigger warnings in this round. Like, I appreciate where they were coming from. I've seen it like in previous rounds at this tournament thus far with like heavy discussions of trafficking, but I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think it warranted 25 seconds of each rebuttal speech and then almost a minute of cross. So be aware of that, because I feel like we really lost a lot of time on the flow to cover some of the issues. A lot in this round ends up becoming a wash for me, money laundering and resource extraction, especially as it relates to neoliberalism and capitalism. I don't dislike the arguments in case, but it becomes so hard to impact, not only because there are so many link chains, like y'all both need to be showing that neoliberal and capitalistic policies specifically perpetrated by the IMF are what go on to resource extract, and that these resource extractions are what in turn hurt citizens. And I just didn't see enough of that. I also honestly don't think there's enough like fundamental institutional discussion or understanding of neoliberalism and capitalism. So I can't really vote on either of those things. I don't love the AF turns when you say that the OECD shows resource extractions are good and that there's a positive relationship between the IMF and democracy, especially because it gets dropped in summary, and then in final focus you just continue to tell me that capitalism is the only way to solve these environmental issues without hitting enough on any of the link chains and impacts. It comes down to the Indo-Pak war for me, and on the AF, I'm just not sure I buy that extinction would have already happened, especially because your evidence talks about a bunch of hypotheticals. Neg, I think you should have hit harder on how Indo-Pak conflict isn't unique, instead of trying to turn it by saying that the IMF enabled Pakistan to rebuild infrastructure. This is what I end up voting on, though. Neg says summary conflict is inevitable and non-unique, and that Pakistan wouldn't have had nukes in the first place if the IMF didn't have them evade pressure from sanctions. This gets extended in the final focus, so I vote on it. Our decision was 3-0 for the neg. I'll let the other judges speak, but that's my piece. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns. Oh, lastly, I want to say turning is literally taking another team's argument and making it offense for you. So I want both sides to be careful with using that word so much. But great job, great round. Thank you everyone for your prep and your passion and for being here.
So I will say that I also voted off the Indo-Pakistan turn, so which I thought was a turn. I think that the round was a bit messier than it should have been, given the fact that you all you did consolidate. I guess I would also emphasize the comment that the judge just made about the trigger warning. This is a particularly sensitive subject, in debate at the moment, and I really feel like it has to be the use of it has to be particularly careful. I thought the position about that the point that Pro made about this was reasonable in cross, and I thought that should just I thought it was a waste of time. So, and that did not help. But it, my view is not going to affect how teams are going to do going forward at any rate, in terms of like the overall NPF. But sometimes there seems like too much time wasted on that. Anyway.
Hey there, this is Tabroom. I just want to check in to make sure that the decision was verbally announced already. We're good? All right, thank you.
Congratulations to both teams on making it this far. I think that you've done a great job, and it's a great accomplishment. Good luck.
I agree with the previous analysis on like Indo-Pak war, and that's kind of how I vote off of there. If I look to neoliberalism, I mean, it ends up being a kind of a mess for me too, but I just see like more of a clarity of link on the con, and like just on the level of like strategy, like I really appreciate, I think for me as a judge, like personally, how clear like the impact chains are extended on the con through Final Focus. So like, especially in rounds where things get a little messier and it's not entirely clear like where the direct engagement's happening on the flow, like having that entire link stay intact and be cited to me as a total unit. I don't know, it ends up being really persuasive when I'm feeling like I don't know how to discern through all of the different stimulant information coming in. So I mean, if I was going to give offense on like econ poverty reduction, it would go there. Just as like a brief note on theory, like I'm saying this like coming out of an octafinals round, which was truly like a round that was 100% about trigger warning theory. And I think if you're like gonna go for theory, it can't be like a blip in rebuttal. Like if you go, it has to become like the organizing unit of the round if you are investing a kind of authority into the issue. Otherwise, like, you can even like, it becomes easier for potential violators to respond that like you're using, theory shells or theory responses as, just a kind of offense. And then like the actual like organizing issue itself becomes a commodified unit that we use in order to win rounds. So like my personal advice about theory is if you're gonna go there, then it needs to be much more significant. But excellent round, wonderfully done. Congratulations to all.
Okay, thank you guys so much. And NSU, great round. I know you're seniors, but like seriously, I think you had a great career, and I was super happy to have like a last round with you.
I'm a junior, but
Oh, really? Oh, my bad. Well,
Are you guys